The smoke of Actium clears, and the century-long Roman civil wars are finally, completely over. The field of slaughter is quiet. Mark Antony is gone, his grand ambitions buried forever in the burning sands of Alexandria. Cleopatra has fallen, her legendary Ptolemaic dynasty ending with a final, desperate gasp against the venom of an asp. The old world is dead. The grand, noble Roman Republic, a system built on shared power, fierce senatorial debate, and centuries of sacred tradition, lies in absolute, irreparable, smoldering ruins. The streets of Rome, which once echoed with the proud steps of free citizens, have been washed over and over again with the blood of brothers fighting brothers. Families have been torn apart, fields have been left to rot, and the grand institutions that once defied kings have been systematically crushed under the weight of naked ambition. And out of the ashes of this scorched earth, out of the devastating body count of 100 years of relentless chaos, one single 32-year-old man stands entirely alone at the apex of existence. He is alone at the absolute pinnacle of the Western world. Octavian, the frail, cold, brutally brilliant adopted son of the assassinated Julius Caesar. Look at him closely. He is not a towering warrior. He does not possess the raw physical intimidation of a gladiator. He is plagued by chronic illness, shivering in the winter chill, yet he possesses eyes like shattered flint and a mind that moves like a venomous viper. At this exact moment in human history, this young man holds more raw, unchallenged power than any single human being to ever walk the face of the earth. The invincible legions of Rome swear their ultimate lives to him. The limitless treasury of Egypt belongs to his personal estate. The entire Mediterranean Sea is no longer a geopolitical battleground. It is his personal lake. But as he stands on the shore and looks out over the vast, bleeding expanse of his broken domain, he does not celebrate. He does not throw a lavish triumph just yet, because Octavian remembers. He remembers the Ides of March. He remembers the haunting sight of his adoptive father, the brilliant Julius Caesar, leaking his lifeblood onto the cold stone floor of the Senate House, stabbed 23 times by his closest friends and colleagues. Octavian knows the most dangerous, undeniable truth of Roman politics. Open dictators get brutally assassinated. He knows that the Roman people harbor a deep, burning, generational hatred for the word king. If he wears a golden crown, he dies. If he openly calls himself a dictator, the silver daggers will inevitably come out of the shadows once again, wielded by idealistic senators who dream of old liberty. To survive, to keep his grip on the throat of the world, he cannot just rule Rome through raw military fear and martial law. He has to pull off a miracle. He has to orchestrate the most elaborate, breathtaking, and terrifying political illusion ever attempted in the history of mankind. To understand the sheer magnitude of the trap Octavian had to navigate, you have to look at what Rome looked like in the winter of 27 BC. The city was overflowing with hundreds of thousands of displaced peasants, bankrupt farmers, and scarred, brutalized veterans from the legions. These soldiers didn't care about the high-minded ideals of senatorial democracy. They cared about who was going to give them their next meal, their retirement land, and their silver coin. For 100 years, generals like Marius, Sulla, Pompey, and Julius Caesar had used these men to march on Rome, turning the sacred boundary of the city into a playground for warlords. The economy was completely shattered. Trade lines were broken by decades of maritime piracy, and the provinces were being bled dry by corrupt governors trying to fund their own private armies. Octavian knew that the traditional Roman elite blamed his adoptive father for all of this. Julius Caesar had committed the ultimate sin. He was honest about his tyranny. He had taken the office of dictator for life, wore purple robes in public, sat on a golden throne in the Senate, and allowed his face to be stamped onto the currency like a Hellenistic monarch. By flaunting his absolute power, Caesar had stripped the Roman aristocracy of their dignity, leaving them with nothing to lose. Octavian realized that men will tolerate losing their freedom, but they will never tolerate losing their illusions. They needed to feel important. They needed to believe that the ancient traditions of their ancestors were still alive, even if those traditions were nothing more than empty ghost stories told in the dark. So Octavian begins a massive campaign of psychological warfare. Before he ever sets foot in the Senate House to resign his powers, he spends years completely transforming his public image. He strips away the terrifying reputation of the cold-blooded warlord who signed the death warrants of thousands of Roman citizens during the proscriptions. He actively builds a narrative of absolute piety and traditional devotion. He stops wearing exotic, foreign attire and dresses strictly in standard, homespun wool togas woven by his own wife, Livia, to signal to the public that the master of the world is just an ordinary, old-school Roman citizen at heart. He begins bankrolling massive religious festivals and single-handedly funds the repair of ancient shrines that had been abandoned during the wars. He associates himself with Apollo, the god of light, order, art, and civilization, contrasting himself with Mark Antony, who had embraced the wild, chaotic, foreign identity of Dionysus. By the time 27 BC rolls around, the public doesn't see a conqueror. They see a savior sent by the gods to restore normalcy to a world that had gone completely insane. The stage is set perfectly. The year is 27 BC. The city of Rome holds its collective breath as Octavian walks completely unarmed into the crowded Senate House. The men sitting in these ancient wooden seats are the old aristocracy, the proud, stubborn defenders of the Republic, or at least, what is left of them after decades of purges and proscriptions. They sit in the dim light, sweating through their wool togas, expecting a declaration of total tyranny. They expect him to march in with his personal bodyguards and demand an absolute crown. Instead, Octavian stands before the assembly, looks the elite of Rome dead in the eyes, and pulls off the ultimate political masterpiece. He humbles his voice. He tells them that his sacred work is finally done. He claims he has restored peace to the world, avenged the murder of his divine father, and brought lasting order to the fractured provinces. And then, with a straight face, he delivers the shock of the century. He announces he is giving all his power, all his invincible legions, and all his absolute authority back to the Senate and the Roman people. He declares the Republic is fully, completely restored, and that he wishes to retire as a private citizen. It was a staggering, brilliant, and completely terrifying bluff. Octavian knew exactly what he was doing. The senators are completely trapped in a cage of their own making. They look at each other in absolute panic. They know that if Octavian truly steps down and goes to his villa, his fiercely loyal legions will immediately mutiny, the rival generals will rise up from the borders, and Rome will instantly plunge right back into another 30 years of horrific, bloody civil war. They are utterly, completely dependent on the very man they fear. Terrified, exhausted, and broken by decades of slaughter, the senators do exactly what Octavian engineered them to do. They beg him to stay. They plead with him to keep control of the armies. They beg him to retain the fractured provinces, to guide the collapsing state from the absolute brink of total ruin. With a perfectly rehearsed display of engineered reluctance, sighing as if a great weight has been forced upon his shoulders, Octavian accepts. Let's look at the actual legal architecture of the lie he constructed that day. This wasn't a sudden, permanent grant of kingly power. That would have broken the illusion. Instead, the Senate granted him a massive proconsular command over the most critical, dangerous provinces of the empire for a fixed period of 10 years. These provinces included Spain, Gaul, and Syria, the exact regions where the vast majority of Rome's legions were stationed. By accepting control of these specific territories, Augustus legally secured control over nearly every single soldier in the Roman world under the guise of an ordinary, temporary military assignment. The Senate kept control of the peaceful, wealthy interior provinces like Italy, North Africa, and Greece, which required almost no military presence. This allowed the senators to feel like they were still running the empire, managing the domestic treasuries and appointing governors, while Augustus silently held the monopoly on absolute violence at the borders. To reward his apparent humility, to honor the man who supposedly saved their democracy by refusing to conquer it, the Senate votes to bestow upon him a new, unprecedented name, Augustus. It is a title that does not mean king, and it does not mean military ruler. It means the majestic. It means the sacred one. It is a word previously reserved only for the holy statues of the gods. With a single vote, it lifts him completely out of the realm of ordinary, flawed human politicians and places him firmly into the realm of the divine. Yet, Augustus is far too clever, far too deeply calculating to ever use a title that smells of absolute monarchy. He completely refuses to be called dictator. He aggressively rejects the title of king. Instead, he chooses a deceptively modest, incredibly simple label for himself, princeps. Translated into plain English, it means simply, first citizen. Think about the sheer, unadulterated, terrifying genius of this political theater. He didn't destroy the Roman Republic by tearing down its ancient institutions. He destroyed it by keeping them exactly as they were, while making absolutely sure he pulled every single string behind the scenes. The popular assemblies still met in the campus. The consuls were still elected every single year with great pomp and circumstance. The Senate still sat and debated laws for hours on end. But everyone in that room knew, with absolute certainty, that the first citizen held the ultimate power of life and death over them all. The elections were rigged before they started, the laws were written by his advisors, and the consuls only ruled because Augustus allowed them to hold the fasces. The absolute monarchy of the Roman Empire was born not with a loud, bloody coup, but with the grand, silent illusion of total democracy. But a political illusion cannot survive on words alone. It needs to be sustained by a complete reinvention of daily life. With his political control absolute, total, and completely unchallenged, Augustus turns his brilliant, tireless mind toward rebuilding a broken world. He initiates a historic era that history books would pass down through the ages as the Pax Romana, the Peace of Rome. For the next 200 years, the Mediterranean world would be largely spared the devastating horror of massive internal warfare, entering a golden period of unprecedented stability, economic explosion, and cultural peak. To make this peace real for the average Roman living in the squalor of the slums, Augustus completely restructures the physical layout and administration of the capital. Before his reign, Rome was a deadly place to live. The city had no organized police force, meaning that once the sun went down, the dark alleyways belonged entirely to criminal gangs, thieves, and murderers. The wealthy had to travel with private armies of slaves carrying torches and clubs just to cross the street. Augustus changes everything by creating the cohorts urbanae, the urban cohorts. These were heavy-handed, highly disciplined paramilitary forces tasked with patrolling the streets, breaking up riots, and maintaining a constant, visible imperial presence throughout the city's 14 newly designed districts. For the first time in generations, an ordinary Roman citizen could walk through the city at night without a guaranteed death sentence. Furthermore, the city was a constant victim of devastating natural disasters. The Tiber River regularly overflowed its banks, turning the low-lying areas of the city into stagnant, disease-ridden swamps that collapsed tenement buildings and drowned thousands. Augustus forms a permanent senatorial commission dedicated exclusively to clearing the riverbed, widening the channels, and constructing massive embankments to control the seasonal floods. He also addresses the terrifying threat of fire. The ancient apartment buildings, known as insulae, were built of cheap wood, mud, and thatch, packed tightly together along narrow paths. People cooked using open flames and lit their rooms with oil lamps, meaning a single tipped candle could burn down an entire neighborhood in an hour. Augustus responds by establishing the vigils, a massive force of 7,000 professional, state-paid firefighters equipped with specialized buckets, water pumps, hooks, and axes. They didn't just fight fires. They patrolled the city looking for building code violations, ensuring that property owners kept water on hand and built their structures with fire-resistant stone. Augustus looks at the capital city of his ancestors, a city that had grown organically into a chaotic, crowded mess of dark mud brick apartments, open sewers, and muddy, flooded streets, and he decides it is completely unworthy of a world empire. He launches the largest, most ambitious public works program in ancient history. He rebuilds 82 decaying temples in a single year. He constructs massive new forums, builds magnificent theaters, and restores the crumbling, ancient infrastructure of the state. Near the very end of his life, looking out over the glittering metropolis, he would famously boast to his companions, "I found Rome a city of bricks, and I left it a city of marble." This architectural explosion wasn't just about vanity. It was a highly sophisticated form of mass media. In an ancient world without printing presses, television, or the internet, monuments were the primary way an emperor communicated with his people. Every single public building Augustus constructed was covered in intricate marble carvings that told a very specific story. The Grand Forum of Augustus featured towering statues of the great heroes of Rome's past, all leading up to a massive, central statue of Augustus himself, visually telling every passerby that his reign was the natural, glorious climax of all Roman history. He builds the Ara Pacis, the altar of Augustan peace, a breathtaking marble structure covered in reliefs showing his family participating in traditional religious sacrifices alongside the gods of fertility and agriculture. The message was unmistakable. Through his military victory and political genius, the earth itself was flourishing once again, crops were growing, and the gods were smiling on the Roman people. But true peace requires a massive, terrifying hammer to enforce it across thousands of miles of frontier. Augustus completely revolutionizes the Roman military machine from top to bottom. He completely eliminates the old, dangerous system of private citizen armies that answered only to charismatic generals, and he creates Rome's very first permanent, professional standing army. Soldiers are no longer farmers dragged from their fields. They are career professionals who sign up for 20 years of service. Crucially, they are now paid directly by the imperial state from a specialized military treasury, ensuring their absolute, undying loyalty belongs to the emperor himself, not to rogue governors or ambitious generals in the field. To protect the civilian population back home, he creates the city's very first organized, professional force of firefighters and night watchmen to combat the frequent fires that devastated the slums. And to protect himself from the quiet shadows of assassination that took his adoptive father, he establishes an elite, highly paid, fiercely loyal personal security force stationed right inside the capital city, the Praetorian Guard. These men were the ultimate kingmakers, an elite brotherhood in polished steel armor who held the ultimate keys to the palace. The creation of the professional army changed the very fabric of Roman society. Under the Old Republic, only landowning citizens could serve in the military. This meant that long, grueling foreign campaigns overseas systematically bankrupted the Roman middle class, as farmers returned home after years of fighting, only to find their lands overgrown, ruined, or bought up by wealthy aristocrats using slave labor. Augustus decouples military service from land ownership entirely. Anyone, including the poorest citizens from the urban slums, could now join the legions as a viable career path. He guarantees every single soldier a massive, standardized retirement bonus, known as the premium, which consisted of either a large lump sum of silver or a valuable plot of arable land in a newly conquered frontier province. This single reform turned the army into the ultimate engine of social mobility and Romanization. Poor men from Italy, and eventually from the conquered provinces themselves, would spend 2 decades absorbing Roman culture, language, military discipline, and engineering techniques, before retiring to build vibrant new Roman-style towns across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. This massive military machine was incredibly expensive, consuming upwards of 75% of the entire empire's annual revenue. To pay for it without causing an economic collapse, Augustus completely overhauls the chaotic, deeply corrupt republican tax system. In the past, Rome relied on a predatory system known as tax farming. The Senate would auction off the right to collect taxes in a specific province to wealthy private corporations called publicani. These corporations would pay the Senate a flat fee up front, and then go into the province with private thugs to extort as much wealth from the local populations as humanly possible, keeping the massive profit for themselves. This caused constant, violent provincial rebellions and drained the long-term wealth of the territories. Augustus completely outlaws tax farming. He orders the first comprehensive, empire-wide census in history, systematically measuring every plot of agricultural land and counting every single human soul from Britain to Egypt. He replaces the private corporations with salaried imperial bureaucrats who collect flat, predictable percentages based on actual land value and population size. For the first time, provincial citizens knew exactly how much they owed. The extortion stopped, and a steady, massive stream of gold flowed reliably into the imperial treasury to fund the legions and the building projects. Under the watchful, tireless eye of the first citizen, the ancient world undergoes a massive, historic economic explosion. Piracy is completely and brutally wiped from the blue waters of the Mediterranean Sea. Thousands of miles of Roman roads are meticulously paved, stretching from the rainy, foggy hills of Britain all the way to the sun-scorched deserts of Syria. Safe, highly efficient trade routes flourish like never before, connecting the markets of Rome to luxury wealth as far away as ancient India and the Han dynasty of China. Silk, gold, exotic spices, wild animals, grain, and boundless knowledge poured directly into the capital, making Rome wealthier, grander, and more dominant than anyone in human history had ever dared to dream possible. The broken, war-torn city of the civil wars had officially become the undisputed, glittering capital of the human race. The economic integration of the empire created an ancient version of globalization. The Mediterranean Sea, once a treacherous zone of naval combat and cutthroat pirate fleets, became the safest and busiest shipping highway on Earth. Massive merchant fleets sailed effortlessly across open water, protected by the permanent imperial fleets stationed at Ravenna and Misenum. This allowed for an incredible degree of regional specialization. Egypt and North Africa became the immense breadbaskets of the empire, shipping hundreds of thousands of tons of grain to Italy every year to feed the millions of inhabitants of Rome for free through the imperial grain dole. Spain became the center of mineral wealth, operating massive state-run gold and silver mines that utilized advanced hydraulic engineering to wash away entire hillsides for precious ore. Gaul and Italy specialized in mass-produced wine and olive oil, shipping millions of clay amphorae across the northern frontiers to supply the frontier legions. This interconnected trade network meant that a middle-class merchant living in a remote town in Roman Britain could drink wine from Tuscany, eat bread made from Egyptian wheat, use oil pressed in Spain, and wear silk imported across the Silk Road from China. Yet despite this incredible explosion of wealth, architecture, and international prestige, the life of Augustus was not a continuous victory lap. The domestic reality within the grand imperial palace was defined by intense paranoia, bitter personal tragedy, and a desperate, agonizing struggle to secure the future of his dynasty. For all his absolute control over millions of subjects across 3 continents, Augustus was completely incapable of controlling his own household. He faced a constant series of private heartbreaks that threatened to undo everything he had fought to build. Because he had constructed a political system that officially claimed the Republic was still alive, he could not simply name a political successor or pass his power to an heir in a traditional will. Doing so would expose the entire imperial system as a monarchy, breaking the delicate illusion he had spent his life maintaining. Instead, he had to slowly, meticulously groom a successor by gradually granting them senatorial privileges, military commands, and tribunician powers. Hoping the Senate would naturally choose them when he was gone. His search for an heir became a decades-long curse. His first choice was his brilliant, beloved nephew Marcellus, whom he married to his only biological daughter, Julia. But before Marcellus could assume his place, a sudden, devastating illness took his life at the young age of 20. Heartbroken but determined, Augustus turned to his closest friend, his military mastermind and the architect of his victory at Actium, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. He forced Agrippa to divorce his own wife and marry Julia, producing 3 grandsons, Gaius, Lucius, and Agrippa Postumus. For a time, it seemed the succession was perfectly secure. Augustus adopted Gaius and Lucius as his own sons, presenting them to the Roman public as the brilliant future leaders of the state. But the curse of the dynasty struck again. Lucius fell ill and died in Gaul, and just 18 months later, Gaius was struck down by a treacherous arrow wound during a military campaign in Armenia. Within a few short years, the future of the entire Roman world was left completely vacant once again, leaving an aging, exhausted Augustus surrounded by ghosts. As his biological options vanished, Augustus was forced to turn to his stepson, Tiberius, the eldest son of his formidable wife Livia from a previous marriage. Tiberius was an exceptionally brilliant military commander, a stoic warrior who had spent decades successfully defending the dangerous Rhine and Danube frontiers against the Germanic tribes. But Tiberius was a cold, bitter, and deeply resentful man. He had never wanted to be emperor. He loved his own wife, but Augustus forced him to divorce her against his will to marry the now widowed Julia, a disastrous marriage defined by mutual hatred and public scandals. Tiberius despised the fake political theater of the court, preferred the raw honesty of the military camp, and felt like an unwanted afterthought who was only being given the empire because everyone else had died. Yet, he was the only capable man left standing. Augustus formally adopted him, granting him equal proconsular power and securing his position as the undisputed successor to the throne, even as the relationship between the two men remained icy and strained until the very end. Augustus rules Rome with an absolute iron fist clad in a soft velvet glove for 40 incredible years. In the year 14 AD, at the age of 76, the first emperor of Rome finally faces his end, dying peacefully in his own bed in the town of Nola, surrounded by his family and advisors. On his deathbed, as the shadows lengthen around him, his final words to his friends perfectly sum up the grand, lifelong performance of his reign. Have I played my part well in this comedy of life? If so, applaud us as we exit. He had played his part flawlessly. He was officially declared a living god by the Senate, his soul supposedly ascending into the Roman pantheon on the wings of an eagle. He had accomplished the absolute impossible. He had taken a dying, chaotic, self-destructive republic and successfully transformed it into a permanent, highly efficient, unstoppable imperial system, an empire so incredibly durable that it would continue to dominate, shape, and rule the Western world for the next 500 years. But absolute power leaves behind a dark, terrifying, and deeply catastrophic paradox. By completely destroying the Republic and concentrating every single ounce of state authority onto a single, absolute throne, Augustus permanently removed all the real checks and balances of human governance. Under the old Republic, if a consul went mad, turned tyrannical, or lost his mind, his power was legally limited to a single year, and he was constantly checked by a co-consul who held equal veto power. Augustus tore down this system of mutual accountability, replacing it with an absolute autocracy disguised as a democracy. He assumed, in his immense brilliance, that every single ruler who came after him would possess his brilliant mind, his incredible patience, his emotional control, and his master statecraft. He believed the system he engineered was so perfect that it could withstand any crisis. He was dead wrong. By building a massive global empire that was dependent entirely on the individual character of a single man, Augustus permanently opened the gates of Rome to a future generation of absolute monsters, tyrants, and clinical madmen. When you create a throne with no limits, you create a prize that attracts the worst elements of human nature. The very system he built to save Rome from chaos would eventually be occupied by individuals who used that absolute power to unleash their deepest, most unchecked depravities upon the world. The throne of the first citizen would be inherited by the sadistic, murderous cruelty of Caligula, who would turn the imperial palace into a literal house of horror, execute his own family members on a whim, and demand to be worshipped as a living god in the heart of Rome. It would be held by the unchecked, burning madness of Nero, who would murder his own mother, launch brutal persecutions against innocent civilians, and watch the Capitol burn while indulging his own artistic delusions. It would descend into the chaotic instability of Commodus, a man who abandoned the administration of the state to fight as a rigged gladiator in the Colosseum, plunging the entire empire into economic ruin and civil war once again. The tragic irony of Augustus's legacy is that the incredible peace, stability, and wealth of the Pax Romana were bought at the exact cost of Rome's long-term soul. To save the body of the empire, he had to kill the spirit of its liberty. He left his people with beautiful marble monuments, safe roads, plenty of food, and an efficient bureaucracy, but he stripped them of their political agency, turning free citizens into passive subjects who had to hope and pray that their next master wouldn't be a monster. The ancient republic, with all its chaotic freedom, fierce debates, and imperfect glory, was dead and buried forever, and the absolute, unpredictable, and bloody age of the emperors had officially begun. And that concludes our epic, four-part documentary series on the spectacular fall of the Roman Republic and the rise of its first empire. We have watched Rome journey from the fierce determination of Julius Caesar through the chaotic betrayals of the civil wars, all the way to the brilliant, cold political masterclass of Augustus. Now I want to hear from you. Looking back across this entire four-part journey, which Roman figure do you think was the ultimate MVP of this era? Was it the raw military genius of Julius Caesar, the fierce passion of Mark Antony, or the calculating brilliance of Augustus himself? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you loved this deep dive into ancient history, do me a massive favor. Smash that like button. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss our next historic documentary series, and make sure to turn on all notifications. But our journey through the shadows of Rome is far from over. By closing the chapter on the Republic, Augustus didn't just build an empire, he built a cage, and the monsters are already waiting at the gates. In our next upcoming documentary series, we are stepping directly into that house of horrors. We will explore the dark, decadent, and blood-soaked reigns of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. We'll follow Tiberius into his paranoid isolation on the cliffs of Capri, witness the terrifying, unhinged madness of Caligula as he declares war on the sea itself, and watch the literal world burn under the artistic delusions of Nero. The Republic is dead, and the age of the absolute tyrants has officially begun. You do not want to miss a single episode of this next chapter. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button right now and click the notification bell so you're the first in line when the next part drops. While you wait for the madness of Caligula, click the video on your screen right now to rewatch our full breakdown of Julius Caesar's fatal mistake on the Ides of March, or check out the playlist to binge the entire Fall of Rome series from the very beginning. Thank you so much for watching the entire series. Until next time, comrades, stay curious, and I will see you all in the next epic chapter of human history.